The salon was almost full that Thursday evening. Table 6 had a bachelor party going loud over mimosas. My lead stylist, Thomas, was doing a blowout in the back while Destiny handled the front desk with her usual quiet efficiency. The windows were fogged from the cold outside, and the whole place smelled like keratin and warm vanilla from the diffuser I'd bought with my first real profit check. I was standing near the color station, reviewing Saturday's bookings, when Destiny came up to me with a look I hadn't seen on her face before. Careful, like she wasn't sure how to hand me something sharp. "There's a man at the door," she said. "Says he's your father." I didn't move for a second. "He's with a woman," she added. "And another guy?" I knew exactly who they were without asking. I told Destiny I'd handle it. I told her to keep the floor running, keep the music at the same level, keep everything exactly as it was. Then I walked toward the front of the salon and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. That old tightening in my chest, like a fist closing slow around something I thought I'd already put away. My father was standing just inside the entrance, his coat damp from the rain. My stepmother was beside him, same rigid posture she always had, chin slightly lifted like she was perpetually bracing for something unpleasant. And my half-brother, 23 years old and looking at the salon the way people look at things they feel entitled to. 3 years. That's how long it had been since the last time any of them had spoken to me directly. Not a birthday text, not a forwarded email, nothing. And now they were standing in the middle of my salon during peak Thursday business hours, in their good coats, like they'd come for a meeting they'd already scheduled in their own heads. My father looked around the room before he looked at me. "I noticed that." "Wren," he said. "That's my name. Wren Callahan. I'm 31 years old. I own a boutique salon called Paper and Shears in Asheville, North Carolina. I built it from nothing over 6 years, starting with a single chair I rented in someone else's space on Lexington Avenue, working 12-hour days, learning the business end of things on nights and weekends, while everyone in my family thought it was a phase. They stopped calling it a phase around the time I signed the lease on my own storefront. They stopped calling me around the same time. I said his name back, that's all. I didn't hug him. I didn't smile. He asked if there was somewhere private we could talk. I looked at my stepmother. I looked at my half-brother. I said we can use the back office, but I only had a few minutes because I had a full floor. The back office is barely an office. It's really a converted storage room with a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a corkboard where I pin vendor samples and scheduling notes. There wasn't enough room for all 4 of us comfortably, which I think is why my stepmother stayed near the door with her arms crossed and my half-brother stood against the wall like he was trying to look casual and failing. My father sat in the chair across from my desk. I did not sit. I leaned against the edge of the desk with my arms loosely at my sides, and I waited. He started by asking how business was going. I said fine. He said the place looked great, that he'd heard good things. I didn't ask who he'd heard them from, because I didn't want to spend time on that. He made a comment about Asheville growing fast, about how smart it was to get in when I did. I nodded. I kept my face neutral. I had been in enough difficult conversations with clients. People going through divorces, job losses, the worst days of their lives, people who needed you to stay steady so they could let themselves be unsteady. I knew how to hold a neutral face. I'd been practicing that particular skill since I was about 12 years old. Then he got to it. My half-brother, whose name is Jonah, had started a clothing brand 2 years earlier. Streetwear, primarily. He'd been doing it online, some pop-up markets, a few small wholesale accounts. My father had been funding it quietly. I didn't know the amount at the time, but I'd find out later. And the brand had run into serious trouble. Debt with manufacturers, an unpaid loan from a private investor my father knew. The numbers my father gave me were vague at first, but the word he kept using was significant. He said Jonah needed to be bailed out or he was going to lose everything. I waited, because I knew that sentence wasn't the end of the sentence. It wasn't. My father reached into his coat and pulled out a folded set of papers and set them on my desk. He did it carefully, not aggressively, but deliberately. The way you put something down when you want the other person to understand it's been prepared, that this isn't spontaneous. He said he wanted me to co-sign a refinancing loan, $48,000. He said my credit was clean, my business was profitable, and that I was in the best position of anyone in the family to help. He said he'd tried other options. He said this was the last one. I looked at the papers. I didn't touch them. My stepmother said something from near the door. Something about how family takes care of each other. How this was a critical moment for Jonah. How I was in a position to make a real difference. She used the phrase step up, and I remember thinking about how many times I'd heard that phrase directed at me over the years. and how rarely it had ever been directed at anyone else in that family. I looked at my half-brother. Jonah was looking at the floor. I said, "Gimme until the end of service tonight." I said I needed to look at the paperwork before I could have any real conversation about it. I said I'd call in the morning. My father nodded. He looked relieved, which told me he'd expected more resistance, which told me he'd already rehearsed for a harder version of this conversation and was glad he hadn't needed it. He thanked me. My stepmother said she appreciated my maturity about this. Jonah said nothing, still looking at the floor. They left. I stood in the back office for about 45 seconds, just stood there. Then I went back to the floor, checked in with Thomas, approved the scheduling changes Destiny had flagged, refreshed the diffuser in the waiting area, and finished out the rest of the evening like nothing had happened. Because my clients deserved that. Because I had built something that ran on consistency and warmth, and I wasn't going to let a 20-minute conversation in my back office take that away from a Thursday night. But here is what they didn't know. They didn't know that 4 months earlier, I had gotten a call from a collections agency about a personal line of credit in my name that I had never opened. $7,000, delinquent for 11 months. I'd assumed at first it was identity theft. I'd filed a dispute, started the process, and then I pulled my full credit report and found something that made the floor feel unsteady under me. There was a cosigner record from 3 years ago. A small business loan. The kind used for startup inventory and equipment. $22,000. Taken out in Jonah's name, with a cosigner signature that looked, from a distance, exactly like mine. I had not signed that document. I had been in Portland for a trade show when that document was signed. I had hotel receipts, flight records, a whole digital trail that said without question I was not in Asheville on the date printed on that signature line. I hired a private attorney named Quentin Shore. He specializes in financial fraud and civil litigation. He is also the calmest human being I have ever met, which I found extremely useful during the months I spent deciding what to do about what I'd found. Quentin told me what I already suspected. The signature was a forgery. He told me what I hadn't fully understood yet, that this constituted identity theft and fraud, both of which carry serious criminal penalties in North Carolina. He told me that I had standing to pursue this. He also told me, and this is the part I kept coming back to, that I didn't have to do anything immediately. That waiting and gathering more information was a legitimate strategy. So I waited. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't call my father. I had my attorney send a formal letter to the collections agency, disputing the debt and flagging the potential fraud, which legally protected me and started a clock I controlled rather than one they did. I kept running my business. I kept building. And then Thursday happened. After the salon closed and Thomas and Destiny had gone home and I'd locked the front door and turned off most of the lights, I sat at my desk in that small back office and read through the papers my father had left. The refinancing loan they wanted me to co-sign was for $48,000. The paperwork listed the existing debts it was meant to consolidate. And there, in the liability summary, was the original $22,000 loan I had never agreed to, the one with my forged signature. They had listed it as a shared liability. They were trying to get me to officially absorb a debt I'd been fraudulently attached to. And by co-signing the refinancing, I would have been legally converting that fraudulent debt into something I'd agreed to. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called Quentin. He picked up on the second ring. It was after 10. He listened to everything I said without interrupting, which is one of the things I appreciate about him. When I finished, he said, "Okay, so they came to you." He said it like he'd been expecting this, or something like it. He said we had options. He laid them out. We talked until almost midnight. The next morning, I did not call my father. Instead, I had Quentin contact his office directly. Not aggressively. Just a formal communication. A letter documenting the forged signature, the fraudulent cosigner record, the collections account, and the timeline that proved I could not have been present for the signing. The letter noted that we had preserved all evidence and were prepared to file a formal complaint with the North Carolina Attorney General's office, as well as pursue civil action, unless we received a signed acknowledgement of the fraud and a formal release of any financial liability in my name connected to Jonah's original business loan. It also noted that the refinancing documents they had presented to me the previous evening would not be signed. My father called me within 2 hours of receiving that letter. He didn't sound angry. He sounded scared, which I hadn't expected, and which made me feel something complicated that I'm still not sure how to name. He said there had been a misunderstanding. He said he hadn't known about the signature. And maybe that was true. Maybe it was Jonah, who'd done it without telling him. I still don't know the whole answer to that. But the legal exposure was real, regardless of who had physically signed my name. because it had been done by someone in that family on behalf of that family's financial interest. I told him I wasn't interested in a conversation over the phone. I told him Quentin was the right point of contact. I told him I wished Jonah well and that I genuinely hoped he found a path forward. But it wasn't going to be built on my credit, and it wasn't going to involve a document that laundered someone else's fraud through my co-signature. Then I told him something I've been carrying for 3 years. I told him that I'd understood, when they pulled away from me, that my choices made them uncomfortable. That choosing to build something on my own terms, without the approval or the roadmap they'd expected me to follow, had felt like a rejection to them. I had spent a long time trying to make peace with that, trying to understand it from their perspective, trying not to be bitter. I was still working on the not being bitter part, honestly. But what I knew for certain was this. I had built something real. I had done it without anyone's help, without a cosigner, without family money or connections or a safety net. And I had done it while being erased. While holidays went unacknowledged and my number went unreturned, and my stepmother told mutual acquaintances that I'd gone off on my own in a tone that made it sound like a character flaw. And the first time they showed up, the very first time in 3 years, was to ask me to put my name on something. I told him I wanted him to really sit with that. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Quentin wrapped up the legal side over the following 6 weeks. Jonah's original loan servicer agreed to remove my name from the cosigner record once the fraud documentation was submitted. The collections account was closed and removed from my credit report. Jonah ultimately filed for bankruptcy protection on the brand, a Chapter 7, which was probably the right move given the debt structure. And that was that. No criminal charges were filed, which was a choice I made consciously and for my own reasons, not theirs. I'm not interested in sending anyone to prison. I'm interested in protecting what I built. My stepmother sent me a text 3 weeks after the phone call. It said she hoped I knew how much my legal aggression had hurt the family, and that she was praying I'd find peace. I read it twice. I didn't respond. I added her number to my blocked list, which is something I should have done a long time before that. My father has not contacted me again. Jonah sent me a message about 2 months later. No apology, not exactly. It was more like a confession formatted as a non-apology. He said he thought I wouldn't find out. He said things had gotten desperate. He said he was sorry it went the way it did. I read it a few times over a few days, and then I sent back a single line, "I hope you figure it out." And then I blocked him too. That's not a satisfying ending, maybe. There was no confrontation across a room full of witnesses. Nobody was escorted out by security. There was no dramatic scene. Just a letter, a phone call, a legal process that ran its course in an office building downtown while I was at work taking care of my clients. But I want to tell you the part that actually matters. The week after all of it was settled, I was standing at the front of the salon on a Wednesday afternoon, and Destiny was training the new front desk hire, a 20-year-old named Kayla who was sharp and eager, and reminded me of myself at that age. That specific combination of ambitious and terrified, and the light was coming in through the windows the way it does in November, low and gold and thick, and the salon was full and warm and loud with the right kind of noise, and I thought, nobody's name is on this but mine. Not because I'm the only person who built it. Thomas helped build it. Destiny helped build it. Every client who came back and brought a friend helped build it. But because when they came for my name, when they tried to attach it to something I didn't choose, I had enough documentation to say no. I had 6 years of building something real and careful enough that it didn't need propping up by fraud. It just needed me to protect it. Which I did. My father taught me one thing that I actually kept. He used to say, when I was young, that you should always read what you sign. He said it a lot, in various contexts, as a general lesson about life and contracts and trust. I don't think he imagined the lesson would one day be used against him. I read everything now. Every document. Every line. Every clause that looks routine and every signature block that seems like a formality. I read it all, because I know exactly what happens when you don't. And I know exactly what it costs. And I know that nobody, not a stranger, not a family member, not someone who says they love you and needs just this one favor, gets to write their mistake into your name. That's mine. I walked back to the color station and I picked up Saturday's bookings and I got back to work. I thought a lot about the version of this story where I said yes, where I sat down across from my father, picked up that pen, and signed the refinancing papers because it felt easier than the alternative. Because saying no to your own family, even a family that had already said no to you, quietly over 3 years of unreturned calls and unacknowledged birthdays, still costs something. It costs something to look at someone who should have loved you better and choose yourself anyway. But here's what I've come to understand. the cost of saying yes would have been so much higher. Not just financially, though that part was real. Co-signing a $48,000 loan built on a forged version of my signature, absorbing a fraud into something I'd legally agreed to. That could have followed me for years. It could have put paper and shears at risk. It could have undone 6 years of careful, quiet building. But the deeper cost would have been something harder to calculate. It would have confirmed to everyone in that room, including me, that my name was still available. That it could still be borrowed without asking. That 3 years of silence hadn't actually changed the arrangement. I think about Jonah sometimes. He was 23 when he walked into my salon looking at the floor. I don't know exactly what he understood about what had been done. Whether he knew the signature was forged, or whether he'd told himself some version of the story where it was fine, where I'd never find out, where it didn't really count because family. People are capable of extraordinary self-deception when they're desperate and when the consequences fall on someone else. That's not an excuse. It's just something I've had to sit with instead of pure anger. Because pure anger is exhausting to maintain, and I have a business to run. What I know is this: the choices that led to that Thursday evening started years before Thursday. Every time someone in that family treated my name like a resource, every time my success was viewed as an obligation rather than a result of work, every time they pulled back instead of engaging, those choices built up until they had nowhere left to go but into my salon, in the rain, with papers already prepared, and my choices built up too. Every year I showed up. Every difficult client I learned to handle with steadiness. Every lease I read in full. Every contract I understood before I signed. Every night I stayed late because the business needed it. All of that accumulated into something solid enough to protect. You don't know what you've built until someone tries to take it, and then you find out very quickly whether it was real. Wren walked out of that back office and back onto the floor, not because she wasn't shaken, but because she'd built something that required her to stay present. That's what I want to leave you with. Not the legal outcome. Not the blocked numbers. The decision to keep going, to walk back to the color station and pick up Saturday's bookings and be fully there for the people who had actually shown up for her. Resilience isn't dramatic. It doesn't look like a speech in a doorway. It looks like going back to work. Your name is yours. The things you build are yours. And nobody, not a stranger, not someone who shares your blood, gets to write their choices into your future without your consent. When you know that clearly enough, the answer becomes very simple. It just takes a while to feel like you're allowed to say it.